Yes. First of all, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. And where were you living at the time?
I was living here in Waterbury.
Okay.
I was born and raised here.
All right. So you've been a Waterbury guy all your life?
That's correct.
Okay. And why did you join?
Why did I join the military? I graduated from Caner Tech, which was a technical high school. I graduated automobile mechanics, and my next move was I wanted to learn how to work on aircraft. And I went through the different services and everything, and I found that the Marines were the best suited for me. And I enlisted on an aviation guaranteed program, which gave me aviation schools, which were outside of Memphis, Tennessee, after I completed boot camp.
All right. And what? Speaking of boot camp, what was it like?
A Marine Corps boot camp is like no other place on earth. It was hard, mentally challenging, physically challenging. Basically, they broke you down physically and mentally and rebuilt you into a Marine. So I'm not saying it's easy, and it's the same thing for today. The young kids that are going in, they're just out of high school, and they're molding them and making a better citizen out of them. But it's tough.
Yeah. Now, was it Paris Island or?
That was Paris Island.
Yeah. And you indicate you joined in August of '65.
I enlisted in April of '65 before
okay.
I got out of high school.
Okay.
I went on active duty August 26, 1965.
Okay. And did you go into any service before going to Vietnam, or did you serve anywhere else prior to Vietnam?
Well, after I finished my aviation schools, I was assigned to New River, North Carolina, which is outside of Camp Lejeune. That's the helicopter base there. And I thought I'd be working on transports, transport aircraft. But after I learned transport aircraft, the next thing I learned was helicopters, and he sent me to New River, North Carolina.
Okay.
And I was there. I was assigned to Mag 26, of which I was doing throttle boxes and carburetors on the CH-34 helicopters. And in July of '66, I was transferred into HMM 262, which was an operational squadron. But they were flying jet helicopters, and so I was back in school again to learn the jets and their related flight systems.
Okay. And the school was located in North Carolina, or?
The basic helicopter schools and aviation schools are located in Millington, Tennessee.
Okay.
But the jet schools were in North Carolina.
Okay. All right. And how long were you in school for the?
For the transition, I'm going to say about a month.
Okay.
To learn the jet engines. And after that, I wanted to be a crew chief on a helicopter. And a crew chief is the in-flight mechanic. And he's in charge of the cabin area of the helicopter. I had to learn that, and then after I qualified as a crew chief, I qualified as an aerial gunner. And after that, we preserved our aircraft up, and boom, we were going to Vietnam. So from July of '66 until December of '66, that's where I did all my training.
Okay. Okay.
And we arrived in Vietnam the first week of December of '66.
All right. And now, whereabouts in Vietnam, in South Vietnam, were you?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
We landed in Chu Lai,
Okay.
which was the Marine base about halfway down the coast of Vietnam. And we took trucks and we went up to Ki Ha, because Ki Ha was where the helicopters were located, which was about 5 miles north of Chu Lai. And that's where I was stationed until February of '67, when I was transferred into HMM 164. And HMM stands for Helicopter Medium Marine. And they were located in Marble Mountain, which is just outside of Da Nang. So I flew from Keha to Marble Mountain. And from there, that's where I first started flying out of, and that was with 164. And of which the first flight that I took was to go to Quezon, which is in the northernmost remote part of the country, and I was up there for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then came back, and in March of '67, the squadron deployed aboard ship. So we went aboard the USS Princeton, and we conducted helicopter operations off of there. Then Princeton went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, of which the Princeton was coming back to the United States for refitting. We transferred over to the USS Tripoli. So the Tripoli left from Subic Bay in the Philippines and went to Okinawa, where we picked up the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And we brought them into Vietnam in April of '67 for the first Battle of the Hills. So you asked me where was I? We're going to start from Chu Lai and go all the way up to the DMZ, from the South China Sea to the Laotian border.
Okay.
So there's not too many places I wasn't.
And by the spring of '67, that's when the Battle of Quezon got started, right?
That's the first Battle of Quezon, what they call it. It was actually called the Battle of the Hills.
Okay.
That's the Battle of Hill 881 North, 881 South, 861. And they are the hills surrounding Quezon itself.
All right.
And when we brought the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines in April of '67, they were the first Marines that were in country with the M16. And the weapon fired fine off the ship. But there was a lot of Marines that were killed behind that weapon because it was jamming in combat. And that's the last thing that you want to have,
Yeah.
is that weapon jamming on you.
Yeah.
And a lot of Marines were killed, a lot of were injured because of the faultiness of the weapon. They tried to blame the Marines for not properly taking care of it. But how do you crawl up the side of a mountain with the rifle and keep it clean all the way up? You don't.
Yeah.
Years later, it was said that Colt Manufacturing right here in Hartford had changed the ammunition and didn't chrome plate the chamber on the weapon. That's why it was jamming.
Huh.
So the fault wasn't with the Marines that had to use it. It came all the way back to the manufacturer right back here in Connecticut.
Wow. Huh. Now, now you were part of a helicopter crew. What was your actual position on the crew?
That's another good question. I'm going to bring this over here a little
Did
bit.
it
So,
vary from mission to mission, or?
no, not really. I don't know if you can grab this in the shot. I'll bring it over here. Can you have it here?
Yep.
Okay. This is a model of the CH-46 helicopter that I worked on and flew in. Now, the pilot sat up in front here.
Okay.
My position was right here. This is the cabin door.
All right.
Where that number 2 is right here, this window would be taken out.
Okay.
And there would be a 50 caliber machine gun that would be out that side. That was my machine gun.
All right.
And there was another machine gun on the other side with my other gunner. And everything that took place from the cockpit all the way back to the rear of the aircraft, I was responsible for. If the pilot said we needed a certain amount of weight and balance in a helicopter is very critical. You have to be able to load this helicopter with either people or cargo, maintaining a center of gravity so that they can fly it. If you have too much weight toward the back, the helicopter is not going to pick up right. Or too much at the front, it's going to be in a nose down attitude. So you had to, weight and balance was very critical. Whether it was that part, being the right side machine gunner, in-flight mechanic, on the master control panel on the dashboard of the cockpit, you have certain lights that says where things might be going wrong. I have to be able to troubleshoot all the systems within the aircraft and fix them if possible. External loads, we used to carry there's a hook in the center section of the aircraft, basically right about here, and that's where we carry external cargo, of which we fly in, hook it up. It might be food, it might be ammunition, it might be water, but we could carry more weight externally than what we could carry internally. And for hoist rescue, I was also in charge of that by reconfiguring the cabin section so that the cable would drop down through the center of the helicopter to pick up an individual. And it may be over water, or it might be over jungle. Someplace that we couldn't land, we would drop the hoist down and pick that individual up.
Okay.
So that whatever goes on with the helicopter, that's what I had to have a working knowledge of.
Okay. Now, at the time of your arrival in country, what rank did you hold?
When I arrived in country, I was a Lance Corporal.
Okay.
That's an E3.
Okay. All right. And now you mentioned bringing Marines in during the early stages of the fight for Quezon, and when it really picked up at the end of '67, were you still flying in that area?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
In fact, I had extended for another 6 months in country. I was scheduled to come home in December of '67.
Really?
And they guaranteed me 6 months back in the States, and I'd be sent back to Vietnam for another year.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured I'm already over here now, let me get the 6 months out of the way. And when I came back, I would only have a year left to do. I'm beating them out of 6 months in combat, of which I did. But with my extending, I walked smack dab into the Tet Offensive of '68 and a 77-day siege on Quezon. So,
Oh, wow.
but I was here in Waterbury when that started. I left Vietnam on January 17th of 1968, and I came home for my 30-day leave, and I was sitting on the couch looking at television, watching my squadron fly into Quezon on the news. And most people couldn't understand it. I says, I don't belong here. I'm supposed to be there. They need me there. And my poor father, I knew it was hard on my mother, me being in Vietnam, but my father, I said, I'm going back for another 6 months. He says, you're doing what? He says, you're a damn dummy. I said, Dad, let me explain. He said, there's no explanation. I just raised a damn dummy. And he walked out of the room. But he had been in World War II, and he had been in the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. He knew something about what combat was about, but he didn't know what I was doing. I mean, yes, there are dangers of being in combat, but he didn't like the idea I was even flying. So he had a lot to worry about. He worried about it more than my mother did. But this was my decision. I mean, he raised us to be our own men, and that's what I did. I made my decision. I had to live with it.
I'm sure you had quite a few memorable experiences. Are there any that jump out in your memory?
There are a lot of memories, good and bad.
Yeah.
The most vivid mission that I flew on that I can remember is called Breaker Patrol, which took place in May of '67. We lost a pilot. What had happened, you had 7 Marines from a recon team that had gone out on a mission, and they ran into more than what they could handle. And they needed an immediate extraction. And the first 2 aircraft from my squadron flew out, and they were going out to pick them up. And when they were going into land, the enemy just shot the chopper to pieces. And it took 50 hits. They had over 150 holes in it. They flew back. So now, because of the intense fire, they were going to send another chopper out. And each time they send a chopper out, you're escorted by 2 Hueys. And you have sometimes fixed-wing aircraft. We call them fast movers, the jet fighters and the jet bombers. the next flight went out, and that was the flight that was headed by Captain Looney. Captain Paul Looney, he was from Massachusetts, Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. And he made his approach here, and he tried to pick the guys up, and they shot his aircraft up. And he was shot, and he got out of the cockpit, he got back into the cabin area. The co-pilot was shot in the foot. The crew chief was wounded, the gunner was wounded. They flew back, but Captain Looney died from his injuries. So, in the morning, I was aboard the Tripoli, and I was flying the Quezon, and the word came down that Captain Looney had been killed. And you know, there's a big hush that comes over the whole squadron when you lose someone, and you're trying to figure out how could this happen. You know, he's sitting in a 300-pound armor-plated seat. He's got a bullet bouncer on in front of him. Oh, he had got shot in the neck, and he basically bled to death. But we flew up to Quezon, and there was another squadron that was going to go out. There was 3 guys that were left from this 7-man team, and they were going to fly out and pick them up. So I'm not worried about it, but I'm looking at Captain Looney's aircraft and another aircraft. They're all shot up. But I knew this other squadron was going to pick up these 3 guys, and they'd bring them back. And about 15, 20 minutes go by, and here comes that squadron back, and there's hydraulic fluid flowing down the outside of the helicopter. And they landed, and they didn't get the 3 guys out. So my pilot says, well, we're next. Well, I said, no, we're next. Yeah, we got to go get those 3 guys, because we're not going to leave 3 Marines out there at the hands of the enemy, and the enemy knew that we were coming. And I looked at him, I said, well, what are we going to have? Well, there's going to be us, and there's going to be 2 Hueys, and there's going to be 2 Phantom jets. I said, that's what they had, and it didn't work. And I said, I'm not going. And my pilot looked at me like I was crazy. But you can quit flying at any time. He said, you're not going? I said, nope, I'm not going. He said, think about it. And he went for the briefing. Well, I had a reoccurring dream that I was I don't know if it was on the ground or on the floor, but I'm laying on my side, holding my stomach, and I'm dying. I don't know if I was shot or I was stabbed, but I knew I was dying, and I knew that this mission was going to bring that dream to fruition. It was going to happen. And what would happen, I think, if they just said, all right, we're going, we've been fine and dandy. But I let my mind start wandering. I'm looking at the other aircraft that were shot up. I know Captain Looney was killed, and we had other people that were wounded. This is what's waiting for me. And I can't tell you if it was my Marine Corps training, the esprit de corps, my own responsibility to myself as a man, or my job as being a Marine. I can't tell you what it was, but all of a sudden, that dream was gone. And I turned to my gunner and I said, go to the other aircraft and get the 50 caliber ammunition off of that. Put it in our aircraft. I said, I'm going over to the small bunker. I'm going to get some rifles and some grenades, and I loaded the chopper up. And the pilot came back. He says, we're ready to go. I says, let's go. And he looked at me and he smiled. And he looked in the aircraft and he could see all the bullets and the grenades and the rifles. He said, what is this? I said, we're going down in a blaze of glory. And he just laughed, shook his head, and got in the aircraft.
Wow. And
we flew out to the area, which wasn't far. It wasn't far from Quezon itself. And we watched the Phantom jets went in. They bombed the area where these 3 guys are still alive at. And the Hueys went in with their rockets and machine guns, and then it was our turn. And this helicopter is a big, slow target. And we broke for the landing zone. And we came about 50 feet over the ground, and the tree line opened up, and it looked, you don't want to be shot at, but it looks like flashes, muzzle flashes, look like flash bulbs going off. And that's your muzzle flash, and they're shooting at us. So we started shooting with the machine guns, and we located where the 3 guys were, and we pulled back into the sky. And the guy who was on the radio, he was going nuts. He was cussing us out. Come on, get us, pick us up. Now, this is like 8 o'clock in the morning. They've been up all night, fighting all night long. And they're still hanging in there, and now they want to be picked up. Well, we did a 360, we came back at the zone, and a little Huey Slick crawled up under us. And the second time we came to the zone, we circled the zone and suppressed the fire with our machine guns while the Huey slid in, picked the 3 guys up, and boom, they were gone. Well, I think it was in, I want to say 95 or 96, they recovered the remains of the 4 people that we didn't pick up. And they were, one guy, he's interned in California and in Arlington. I mean, all you have is bits and pieces that are left. But they buried the remains of those 4 people in Arlington Cemetery, and I was there for that.
Wow.
And I met some of his family. I met the crew chief that was on the Huey that actually made the rescue. Now, he got a single mission air medal. The pilots got distinguished flying crosses. The guys on the ground, they gave out silver stars, they gave Purple Hearts, all kinds of medals, Navy Cross. We got 1 combat mission. Now, it takes 20 combat missions to get an air medal. We got 1 combat mission. But that's all right. We got the 3 guys out. I don't care how we got it, but those 3 guys were returned, to quote the world. They got back to the United States. That's the most memorable mission that I can remember because I got over my fear of dying. And once you get over your fear of dying, you can do anything. But if we had just taken off and attempted the mission, we might have crashed and burned. We might have made the rescue. Can't say one way or the other, but this is the way they decided on doing it. But I didn't know that's what we were going to, the place where my fellow squadron mates, one was killed, others were wounded. You got 2 helicopters that are all shot up. Actually, 3 helicopters are all shot up. And now this is what's waiting for me. You know, this is where I said, all right, let's go. I'm a part of this crew. This aircraft, he could fly without me. You know, I don't think they really want to fly without me, but they could have flown without me. Or they could have got another crew chief to go with. But that's where I got over those fears at that point in time. And I flew over 300 combat missions, but out of all of them, that's the one that I remember the most, from beginning to end. And that's what inspired me to write my book.
Uh-huh.
And I put this mission down, and that's where the book started. It started with that mission, and then I expanded both frontwards and backwards from that mission, and trying to remember things that had taken place 40 years beforehand.
Wow. What was your most, what do you have the happiest memory of?
R&R in Bangkok, Thailand, but I don't remember most of it. Excuse me.
Were there USO shows in the area that you were able to attend, or?
We didn't really get a chance to attend it.
Really?
Yes, there were Bob Hope and not Marilyn Monroe, but Jane Mansfield was there.
Uh-huh.
You had several different USO shows that came through, and most of the time we were transporting them.
Really?
The entertainers, but we didn't get a chance to stay. Now, if they was at Da Nang, you fly them into Da Nang. You go back and do what you have to do, while the troops that were around there, that were stationed there, they got to see the USO show. But I don't. We had little shows that came in, but the basic. When you say USO show, you start thinking of Bob Hope.
Yeah.
And the tour that he took through. But you had little shows, and most of them they were. I mean, Ann Margaret was there. Different entertainers did come through there, but exactly who it was, I couldn't tell you, because if I'm aboard ship, they're not giving the USO show aboard the ship.
Right.
And I spent 9 months out of my 19-month tour. I spent 9 months of it aboard ship. So that takes away from it also. And then there was areas that the USO show didn't go to because it wasn't safe.
Right.
If I'm stationed in Phu or in Quang Tri, I'm flying in the Dong Hai and all the different LZs around Quezon and in and out of Quezon. they're not gonna be up there. They never gave a USO show in Quezon.
Mhm.
It's not safe for them up there. It wasn't safe for anybody to be up there.
Yeah.
But they would go to Chulai, they would go to Da Nang, they go down to Cam Ranh Bay, they'll be around Saigon and Tan Son Nhut. Yes, they did get around. Yes, they brought the troops in that were around there. There's a whole lot of troops that didn't get to see them.
Wow. Hey, were you ever wounded?
No,
No.
thank
That's
God,
good.
no.
That's good.
The biggest thing I had, like, you bust your knuckles being a mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
You get caught on safety wire, cotter pins, and the wrench slips. The biggest thing that I had, I caught my hand on some barbed wire under a mortar attack. And I went for a tetanus shot in the morning, and the corpsman said, "You qualify for a Purple Heart." I said, "No, I don't want the Purple Heart for catching my hand on barbed wire." I said, "You got people out here that are being shot and wounded, and they're gonna ask me how I got my Purple Heart. I caught my hand on barbed wire? No, I don't want that." So I didn't get it. I didn't want it.
Wow. Were you awarded any medals or citations?
I have 16 air medals.
Uh-huh.
I have my combat air crew wings, these are my original combat air crew wings that were awarded to me in 1967.
Okay.
So I wear them around my neck in support of all veterans. And once people learn how you get the wings, you don't have to say anything else. You know what I mean? I was told that you had to be shot at on 3 different missions, and you get your combat wings. And I was told that you got the wings when you got your first air medal, which takes in 20 combat missions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. To this day, I still don't know how you get them. But I after the 5th or 6th time I was shot at, I got tired of counting. This makes no sense to count how many times I'm being shot at. And 16 air medals, I think somewhere along the line, I rated them.
Wow.
So our squadron, for the Battle of the Hills back in April and May of '67, we were awarded the Navy Unit Commendation. For the 77-day siege on Quezon and the Tet Offensive of 1968, we were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. I've been awarded the Combat Action Ribbon and the Good Conduct Medal. I didn't get caught.
Were you able to stay in touch with your loved ones back home?
Well, it's not like it is today with the email and the internet and everything, but yes, with the snail mail,
Yeah.
that's what we had. I wrote everybody. And I was writing girls in North Carolina and Pittsburgh, all around the country. Anybody wanted to listen to me, plus people that were here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, mail call was a big part of being overseas, is staying in touch with those back home.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a morale booster.
Oh, and that didn't work. You had booze and women.
Well, that too.
That's the universal cure for worrying.
Was the food okay?
What food?
What food?
No, I mean the chow was all right. In Fubai, there was so much dust and dirt blowing around that the mashed potatoes crunched, you know.
Ooh. Mm.
But we had, it was called sea rations, and we're talking in the mid-60s, and we were eating sea rations from 1949, 1959. That's what we were eating. I mean, it was still good. It was palatable. It didn't kill us.
Mm.
But you when you're carrying the food itself, you had your choice. I mean, everybody liked spaghetti and meatballs, and nobody wanted the ham and lima beans. You had the pressed pork, and you had the pressed ham. Everybody wanted the pound cake with the peaches. If I'm carrying a case of sea rations, I got my choice of what I want. So we ate pretty good. But when we went aboard ship, the Navy ate good. They ate very good, you know.
Hmm.
But to say, was the child, it wasn't mom's home cooking, but
Yeah, yeah.
but no, it was good.
Okay. Um, and okay, you went back for a second tour. You mentioned in '68,
Right.
and that was, you said, a year or?
The tour of duty was 13 months.
Okay.
And by right, I was supposed to be coming home. We got there in December of 66. And I spent the entire year 67 in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So I should have been coming home in December of 66, or 67 rather. But by extending another 6 months, I came home in January of 67. No, January 68. And I went back to Vietnam in February of 68. And the Tet Offensive, that started around, I'm gonna say around the 25th, around the 25th of January of 68.
Mm-hmm.
And the 77-day siege on Khe Sanh started too. And when I got back, I was there in time for the 77-day siege.
Wow. So you were flying to supply the garrison there?
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah.
On a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so dangerous that it got to the point that we weren't even landing because they had all the landing loading areas. They had those all zeroed in. So we'd come in, and the pilot would set the chopper up on its end, and all the cargo would slide out, and we just keep going.
Hmm. Wow.
We had another squadron was run over by an airdrop from the Air Force out of a C-130 where the cargo actually hit the helicopter, and of course everyone was killed on that. So you had a lot of aircraft going in and out of there, and it was a very dangerous place just for the air traffic, not to mention the enemy,
Wow.
because Khe Sanh was a very small base.
Mm-hmm. Were you involved in the fighting for Hawaii as well?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's all part of Tet Offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And we were flying into, they call it the Horseshoe, but it was just off from the Citadel. It was a stadium that they were using as a big medical evacuation hospital, and we were flying wounded in there. But one of my best friends, he was killed overway in February of 68, and that was a little tough. That was tough because when I came home in January of 68, this person asked me to stop by his parents' house that lived in Vallejo, California.
Mm-hmm.
And I expressed all his wishes and everything else, and the family treated me like gold. And they were happy that Lonnie was doing what he wanted to do. And when I got back, he was killed a day or two before I got back. And then my heart went out to his family because I had been there a month before, and that really bothered me.
Well, what did you think of your fellow comrades? Were they generally decent folks to work with? And
We're a family.
yeah,
It's a brotherhood.
yeah,
They're close. They're as close to me as my natural brothers.
Mm.
I don't know how else to put it. The bond that you form from being in combat, it's not matched anywhere else in life. And I've done just about everything else in life you can do. I spent 28 years on the police department. I've got my private pilot's license. I've done just about everything. And even out of the 28 years on the police department, the bonds that I had with the individuals I had for that year and a half are still much closer. And I've been in contact with some of them. whether in Texas or New Jersey. One of the other crew chiefs that served with me in Vietnam just moved to Waterbury from Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's great to have Louis around here. I mean, because I hadn't seen him in 35 years before I saw him, and I'm saying he was taking a train into New Haven. I said, how am I going to recognize this guy? I haven't seen him in over 30 years. And when he walked through the train station, I recognized him by his walk.
Wow.
And in 1990, we had a reunion. We had our first reunion down in Washington, D.C. And I went there, and there was guys sitting at the table, and I didn't recognize them. So we were in the squadron in 69, 70, and 71. I said, well, I'm looking for somebody that was there when I was there. They said, well, why don't you take a look in the bar? So I went and I looked in the bar, and I didn't see anybody. I didn't recognize anybody. And now I was getting this sinking feeling like, why did you even come here? You know, the war is over, let it go. This one guy stood up and he had a round face. And I looked at him and he looked at me and I didn't recognize him. And he smiled. I said, Worm. I recognized him by his smile. Now we were all 19, 20-year-old skinny kids. Now here's this guy, a round face, you know, gray hair, and I recognized him by his smile.
Wow.
But that's how close you become. You can change all you want, but there's certain characteristics that will never change.
Yeah, yeah. Now you have a reunion coming up, don't you?
Which one? I just missed. Last year we were in, where did we go last year? We were in Washington, D.C. with Papa Smoke, which is the USMC Combat Helicopter Association, and a lot of the guys get together there. Next year we're going to be in Reno, Nevada. We get together every 2 years. I missed the reunion for HMM 262 in Houston, Texas, because that was the end of July, and I had other commitments. I couldn't make that one. But there's always some place to go. Since 1990, we have been getting together on a regular basis, and it's great to see the other individuals that you serve with, that they're not the demented Vietnam veteran that the press tries to depict us as, but they're all parts of. We're all a part of society. One of our pilots, one of the craziest pilots we had, is an attorney. He's got a flourishing business in Tampa.
Wow.
You know, and you know, this is what I'm talking about. You know, you got doctors and lawyers and policemen, and you got firemen, and you know, business people. They melted back into society. You know. And most guys don't even talk about it. You know, it's the military. The military part of my life was 4 years, but it had a tremendous effect on everything that else I did in my life. So everything goes back to those 4 years, and taking it down all the way back to that year and a half in Vietnam. But the most responsible job that I ever had was being 19 years old, being in charge of a $1 million helicopter. And everybody that got on that helicopter had to have some faith in me, in my ability to do my job. And that from the passengers, the pilots, because I was responsible for the mechanical operation of the aircraft. And I took that very seriously. And this same helicopter is being used in Afghanistan and Iraq today. They haven't made a CH-46 since 1973. And we don't trust any helicopter that's under 40 years old, because it's been the backbone of the Marine Corps since 1964, so you're talking 45 years.
Wow.
45 years they've been using this helicopter. Now they're trying to phase it out and bring in the Osprey, this new tilt-rotor aircraft that lands like a helicopter and flies like an airplane. But it's still, they say that the CH-46 will be in service with the Marine Corps until approximately 2015.
Wow.
Now you talk about, you know, the B-52 has been around since the early 50s, but it's not used as extensively as the CH-46 is. The C-130 has been around since the mid-50s, still not used to the extent that the CH-46 is.
Wow.
Because they're basically doing, you're doing a bombing mission with the B-52. You fly out, drop your bomb, you fly back to the base. The C-130 is flying in dropping off cargo and leaving. The CH-46 is the mainstay of the Marine Corps' vertical envelopment. You have a battalion of Marines aboard ship, and you need to get them inland. 90% of the time it's going to go by helicopter, and that's where CH-46 comes in. Not only was it troop transport, cargo transport, medevac aircraft, it did and is still doing everything that's been asked of it in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
Where the Army has gone from the Huey to the Black Hawk, the Marine Corps still has the CH-46 C9.
Wow. Huh. Now your final time in Vietnam ended in '69?
August 68.
August 68, okay.
I got out in 69.
All right. Okay, so between August 68 through 69, where were you?
I was stationed back in New River, North Carolina.
Okay.
HMM 161 was the squadron there. And what we were doing, we were training the mechanics, the crew chiefs, the pilots, working with them, getting them ready to go to Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
to make them proficient in what they had to do. And what we brought back was a different way of doing maintenance, because when you're in the States, you're working off a normal base. There's certain procedures that you have to follow, and it's right by the book. But when you get into combat, you kind of bend the rules a little bit, but you're not suicidal. But there's a better way, a faster way of accomplishing the job,
Mm-hmm.
than basically what it's saying by the book, where you would hook a bomb hoist cable from the aft pylon to let the engine to change one of the engines. We found out you can change an engine very quickly with 3 people. You put 2 people under, you push up, you take the top pin out, he comes down, takes the side pin out, and he takes the 2 back ones, you drop the engine down, the engine only weighed 375 pounds. And you take the other engine, you put it up, 2 guys hold it up there, the guy put the top pin in, put the back pins in, and we change an engine in an hour. Where, according to the book, it would take you about 3 hours to do it.
Tax dollars at work.
Well, yeah, it's okay when you're learning.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
when you're in a hostile environment, let's say that you lose an engine and you can't fly, and you got to change an engine in the field, you're going to do it as quickly and as safely as possible.
Yes.
In July of '67, I believe I'm one of the first crew chiefs to ever change an aft transmission, which is located back here in the rear of the aircraft. Actually, you have a drive shaft that comes here, and another one goes up here to the forward rotor head. But you have a 600-pound transmission in there, and it was failing me. And it was changed in the field. It had never been done before.
Wow.
But I did that. Not that I wanted to. I was out there all night. They dropped mortar rounds in on us. We stayed up most of the night, and we worked on getting it out. They sent us out another transmission, put it in the field, and then called for 2 pilots to fly us back to the ship. And we got it up and flew back to the ship.
Wow.
But that's the job of a crew chief. You have to be able to do that without the book. You can't go everywhere with the book. There's certain tolerances, certain torque specifications that you have to have. But the basic maintenance, you have to know it.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, what do I do with this? You better know. That's your responsibility. And to have that kind of responsibility at such a young age, and like I said, I'm a licensed private pilot, a police officer, a retired police lieutenant. I have never had a more responsible job in my life than being a crew chief on a helicopter.
Wow. Now you mentioned earlier that you held the rank of Lance Corporal, and you indicate here you became eventually a Corporal E4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When did that occur?
That's a good question. It happened, I'm going to say around April of 1967.
Okay.
I was promoted. I'll take it. It was April. Because that was my last promotion.
Okay.
That was in April '67. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was still a Lance Corps. No, I was a corporal
Okay.
with 26 months in grade because somebody gave me conduct and proficiency marks so low that I never make sergeant.
Hmm.
And it was right, because the day I got out, they had promotion to sergeant, and I didn't get it. But if I got promoted to sergeant when I was supposed to get promoted to sergeant, I would have stayed in.
Hmm.
No, I love the military, but I also love the job that I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. You came back to the States in '68. What kind of homecoming did you guys get?
None.
Really?
We came back, we left Vietnam, went to Okinawa. I was there for, I guess, 48 hours
Uh-huh.
before flying back to the States and landing in Travis Air Force Base. Nothing. There was no, I mean, at least now they're giving the guys coming back from Iraqi freedom operations some readjustment time, some counseling. We got nothing. You know, here it is 48 hours before I was flying in combat, or I'm in a combat area, and now all of a sudden I'm back in the United States and I'm supposed to act like everything's okay.
Hmm.
What kind of reception? Of course, you know, I got here, you know, the parents and the friends were happy to see me. But outside of that, there was nothing. You know? And at that point in time, in '69, you had the anti-war movement going on. They didn't like us, and we didn't particularly like them. But we heard about what was going on back here, even being in a combat situation. But the vast majority of the country had turned their backs on the veterans. You know, they may not like the message, but you don't shoot the mailman because you didn't like, you know, that's policy is set in Washington. And to this day, even now, whether or not you're for or against the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, that has nothing to do with the individual that's sent out there to wage the war. You know, policy is dictated and it's changed in Washington. It's the duty of the soldier, sailor, or the Marine to go out and do your job. And that's what you're trained to do.
Now, I guess my next question would be, do you have photographs that you'd like to share with?
Well, you know, when you're in high school and you're in college, you have your yearbooks.
Uh-huh.
We have what's called cruise books,
Okay.
and this is from my squadron, HMM 164, Vietnam, 1967.
All right, let me just make sure it's picking up. Yep.
But as you can see, that's the same aircraft as that I depict right here.
Uh-huh.
But if you like, you know, here is showing, now this is the gunner. This is on the passenger side. The crew chief is on the other side, but you can see the 50 caliber machine gun sticking out right there.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, we were noted for the big white YT on the tail. And I don't know how much of this you're gonna try and get in here, but I've got
Is there?
this picture right here
Uh-huh.
was taken July 4th, 1967.
Mm-hmm.
This is my helicopter in the back when I was changing that aft transmission.
Okay.
And the reason I know that is because the door, the hatch in the back is open, and this guy brought in the new transmission for us.
Hmm.
But we were sitting in a dried up rice paddy. But this is what we had. The funny part about it is you had all these individuals that doing different jobs, and if it wasn't for these cruise books, as we call them, the names would be lost in history.
Hmm.
I don't know. This page here has Randy Little was killed in July of '68. And 2 years ago, my best friend, Larry LeGrand, he passed away in Texas. And we hadn't seen each other. This gentleman here, Mike Botch, he lives down in Texas. I was at his house 2 years ago. But there's just so much. I mean, this is just one of the books, but the most important thing here, maybe you can see this, is our casualty list.
Wow.
And it starts at the top with Captain Paul Looney, killed in action May 10, 1967. That was Breaker Patrol. And anyone down here that's May 10th, you have a group here that were all wounded on that same day. We had there was a total of 23 that were killed from my squadron from the time it entered country in '66 until it left in '71.
Wow.
I didn't know the first 2, and I didn't know the last 3. The other 18 I didn't know that were killed in action. And what happened, like I said, this is the first book. And they got the addresses of those members of the squadron. Although some of them are still good after all these years.
Really?
I have gotten a hold of some, but you have to understand, this is 1967, and I found out I was only in there once out of the entire book. And there's just a picture of the squadron, but this one here, this book, is 1968, and it's the squadron. But I started following the cameraman around. Now here, when you lose a chopper, if you lose the whole chopper, you lose 4 people. So on here you have 9 people that were killed, 68. 1 whole chopper, 4 people. I mean, we were very lucky. We were very lucky. Because we flew in the most dangerous of places. And we had the reputation that no matter where you were, we're coming.
Wow.
And I just wanted to get to one administration. I know there's a picture in this. Intelligence, well, military and intelligence doesn't go hand in hand. But that's a picture of me over here.
Okay.
I know what I was doing. I was talking about the unusual tread wear on the tires of the helicopter to my first mechanic. And this is my other first mechanic. He's inspecting the nose strut. But I can look at the pictures and I can go back to some, right back to those days. And like I said, I followed the cameraman around, and it says our man Sam Beamon. Because it didn't happen first time. Now here, this gentleman here, and you might be able to note that his name is Tom Kennedy, but doesn't he look like President John F. Kennedy?
Yeah, he does.
He's one of his cousins.
Wow.
He's one of his cousins. He's living down in Texas now,
Uh-huh.
and I saw him 2 years ago. But yeah, like you asked me what the relationship is, I can't describe it. I cannot describe it. These individuals will walk on water for me, and I do the same thing for them. And that's about the only way I can describe it. Whether there's a different relationship between enlisted and officers, because you're part of a crew. That we depend on the pilots depend on the crew chief and the gunner. And in this picture here, that's the crew chief's position right there with the 50 caliber machine gun. That's the cabin door, and the crew chief sits right behind the pilots. But now in the back, you have a ramp that goes down, and that's how you bring the cargo in and the people come in most of the time. That gives you an idea of the size of the helicopter. When you think of Vietnam, everybody thinks of Hueys. This is a lot bigger than a Huey. Right now they're flying the CH-47, the Chinook, which the Army uses for heavy hauling, heavy lifting. Same thing for the Marine Corps, although the Marine Corps uses the CH-53 for their heavy hauling. But it's HMH, Helicopter Marine Heavy. And this is Helicopter Marine Medium. So this is the workhorse. This is the workhorse of the Marine Corps.
Okay. Wow.
But I think they can locate these books. I think Turner Publication, I think they're the ones that did these books. Because there is no printing on the inside on who it is. Because actually, they're military issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, exactly who had the contract for making up the cruise books, I don't know. But a few years ago, this was done by Turner Publication, which is the USMC Vietnam Helicopter and Pilot and Crew Members Association. This started back in 1992. A bunch of pilots got together, and they went and they had a little mini reunion, about 8 of them, in Las Vegas. And so, all of a sudden, people started hearing about it. Hey, why don't you include the air crew? Then it became USMC Vietnam Helicopter Pilot and Air Crew. Well, that's great. Next, you had the other people, you had support personnel that wanted to be a part of this. And they changed it again. And it became USMC Vietnam Helicopter Association. They eliminated this. So if you were just a member of the squadron, you could be a member of the association. Changed again.
Really?
It is now, like I said, it went from USMC Vietnam Helicopter Association to the USMC Combat Helicopter Association. Because now we could bring in those individuals that were in Desert Storm, Iraqi freedom, those individuals that have been flying in combat, they are also welcome into the Helicopter Association.
Wow.
So now we won't be like the Doolittle Raiders of World War II. You know, when the last person is there from the Doolittle Raiders, he drinks the champagne. He opens a bottle of champagne that they've had all these years, and he drinks to all those that passed away before. This way, we constantly have an influx of new individuals that were flying in combat, and it doesn't make a difference if they were flying in Korea, because that's where the Marine Corps first started using helicopters, all the way up through Vietnam, going to Somalia, or you're talking about Desert Storm, or you're going down to Iraq or Afghanistan. Anybody that's flown in combat with the Marine Corps is eligible to join this association.
Wow.
So we're getting the influx of the new blood, and it's kind of strange. You look at kids that, you know, they're younger than my son, but they were doing the same thing that I was doing, and it doesn't make a difference what conflict you're in. Once you take off in a helicopter and you're the crew chief, it makes no difference where you're flying. The responsibility is still the same. Whether it was 40 years ago in this helicopter or it's today with the same helicopter, the responsibility is still the same. Your job is to support the troops. Your job is to keep that helicopter flying to support the troops, and that's what you do. Like I said, it was the most responsible job that I've ever had, and to be so young to do it. But you had to know everything from the nose of that aircraft to the tail.
Wow.
Let's see how we're doing on time here.
Why don't we stop it right for a second?
Okay. There we go. I just want to show the Zippo here.
And the other side.
All right.
That lighter was etched in just outside of Marble Mountain in 1968. And I flew with this lighter. And I really want to take it back to Zippo and have them refurbish it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm afraid to send it, so I'm going to have to take it to them.
Wow. And you mentioned could you describe again
the meaning of that little Snoopy as Red Baron?
Snoopy, he was our mascot.
Uh-huh.
And on the back of his doghouse, there's a small line, and that represents a crack.
Uh-huh.
And in August of 1967, we had a little problem with the helicopter. They were being flown longer, harder than it was ever designed to fly. And we had a small mechanical problem that most people didn't think anything about it because we didn't know what was happening. And what was happening is, it was called the Station 410 structural failure. Station 410 is right here where the aft pylon, which is this section here, meets with the cabin section. They were developing cracks, and the whole rear echelon of the helicopter was falling off. Now, we had one tear itself apart in a revetment. We had one chopper land on the runway and the back end fell off. But then we had some others that were in flight and the back ends fell off, meaning everybody died. You don't wear parachutes, that's the first thing. Everybody in the helicopter crew, nobody wears parachutes. So if the back section falls off, your engines, your transmission, your hydraulic pumps, your electrical generators are all in this section right here. And when that leaves, it doesn't fly very well. It will actually tear itself apart.
Wow.
And they grounded the aircraft until they fix that failure. But nobody talks about that. Now you have the problem with the Osprey, which is the V-22, where you had some individuals that were killed during the testing portion of it. But that happens. Any aircraft that leaves the ground is going to crash. Sooner or later, it's going to crash. It's all on how is it going to crash. Now, is it from pilot error? Is it from combat damage? Is it from weather, mechanical failure? There's all different things once you leave the ground that can kill you. And we didn't really think about it then. All right, we had a problem, they fixed the problem, we started flying again. Well, this aircraft has been flying now for 45 years. And it's one of the safest. As a matter of fact, I saw on one of the shows, it was a reality TV, it was on one of the off channels. It might have been 53 or 54 on the Cox cable. But they showed where a 46 was taking off from the carrier. And the reporters were sitting in the cabin section, and they were shooting out the back end of the helicopter. Well, somewhere up in the rear of the transmission, a hydraulic line broke and caught fire. So they lifted off, and the smoke is coming out, and they see the flames coming out. They were able to set it down. Everybody got off the chopper. They were able to put the fire out. But that's just one of the things. I was only down in the field twice. Once for the aft transmission failure in July of '67, and for a hydraulic line that I had to change. Those are the only times I was down in the field. I was very fortunate.
Wow.
But there are so many moving parts on a helicopter. By right, it's not supposed to fly, because your airfoil, which are your blades, are smaller than what the whole body is, and it's like a bumblebee. A bumblebee's body is bigger than what his wings are, and he flies, and the helicopter flies too. That gives you some kind of an idea of what we had to deal with, on top of worrying about the enemy. I mean, the enemy, he's out there somewhere. Our job was to make sure that the people that flew on our chopper were safe, plain and simple as that. I mean, we took off from spot one on the carrier, and I'm a prankster. And so I had a chaplain. He was on board along with a couple other passengers and some cargo. And it was a hot day, and I turned to the chaplain and I says, "Could you say a few words? Because it's going to be a close takeoff." And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. So I sat down in my seat, the crew chief seat, and we started to lift off, and we go out over the front of the ship, and we lost power on one of the engines. And we dropped. And I watched the flight deck go by, I watched the anchor go by, and we're headed for the water. Now, there is no way that the aircraft carrier can stop on a dime. And we're right out in front of it. it's gonna run us over. And just before we hit the water, the engine came back online and we came up. And I looked at the chaplain. He looked at me. I said, "Thank you." Those words help.
Wow.
You know, there are funny times, and you know, there's sad times, but the good times outweigh the bad. And I was here in Waterbury. I was on the green for Veterans Day, and a guy comes up to me. He says, "You were in helicopters, weren't you?" I said, "Yes, I was." He says, "You were flying at the Battle of the Hills." I said, "Yeah." "You medevac me."
Wow.
I said, "I don't know." And I had a reporter come up to me. "Did you know he was from Waterbury?" I said, "Get out of my face." You know, I hugged him and I welcomed him back to the world. Only he knows for sure. And his name is Joe O'Neill. He just retired from the post office. He was shot in the neck in April of '67. And yes, I was flying up there at Quezon. Only he knows for sure. But I get a warm feeling every time I see his face. You very rarely get a chance to meet somebody that you actually, help with their treatment. I'm not going to say saved his life, because I did my job. He was treated. He was a medevac. I might have medevac, brought him back to the aid station. Now here he is back in Waterbury, and it was over 30 years that he remembers the person that was on the helicopter that took him out.
Wow.
Now I might that same day I might have taken 20 people off the hilltop and brought them back for treatment. There's no way in the world I'm going to remember, or even know. I didn't know. First of all, I didn't know the individual. Second of all, he would have been covered with mud and blood and bandages, and he wouldn't have been in no shape to say, "Hey, I'm from Waterbury. Where are you from?"
Yeah.
So what are the odds? I feel like that I won the lottery.
Wow.
Because the odds of two people going in the Marine Corps at different times, not knowing each other, and winding up in Vietnam in the same place, one of them being wounded, to be medevac, come back to his hometown. So many people don't come back to their hometown. Come back to your hometown and then approach me and ask me if I was flying up there. I said, "Yeah, I was flying." And it was you. But I feel good every time I see Joe.
Wow.
Now you're saying what is the camaraderie? You can't explain it. You have to be there. There's certain things. It's like Marine Corps boot camp. I can talk all day long about it, but if you haven't experienced it, you really won't understand it.
Yeah.
And that's one of my sayings is, if I have to explain it, you wouldn't understand it.
Wow.
But I think every veteran that you talk to, they're going to have stories like this.
Mm-hmm.
If they were in combat, it only intensifies it. If they were in the service, you develop those bonds and those friendships by going through boot camp. And there's no, as they say, there's no I in team, and you learn to work as a team. And that's what you have to do once you get out of the service. You're working as a team, no matter what it is. If you're working in the shop, or you're working in the police department, the fire department, EMS, you're working as a team. You don't do it all by yourself. And that's what you learn to do. And that's the way the world is.
I think we've pretty much covered all the questions that they've prescribed. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
There's really nothing else that I'm just happy that society has changed their attitude toward the veteran himself.
Yeah.
And giving these kids, and I say kids, these men and women, and that's another whole thing, giving these men and women the support they need when they do return, because they need just as much support after they get out or they get back to the States as they need when they're over there. And before, it was just worrying about the male, the father, the husband, the boyfriend, who had the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, or psychological problem from being in combat. Now, women want equal opportunity. They are equal at getting PTSD. And there's a lot of women that are coming back that are screwed up. Combat is not the nicest thing in the world. Actually, it's the ugliest, the dirtiest, the nastiest thing on the earth, because that's the last straw of what you do to another individual, because they're going to try to do the same thing to you. They're serving their country just like we're serving our country, and our job is to make them die for their country. We're not supposed to die for our country. And there was never any kind of counseling of how to deal with the loss of another Marine, somebody else you grew up with. And, you know, I've got individuals, their names are on the wall, that came out of Waterbury, that I grew up and I played with. The first Marine that was killed in Vietnam from Waterbury was Norman Dawson. Norman Dawson was 18 years old. Norman Dawson didn't graduate high school. He went in the Marine Corps. He became he was a rifleman. He was killed in Quaintree Province in July of '66, and I became the official escort, meaning the official representative of the Marine Corps to his family here in Waterbury, because I was coming home for his funeral. And that's the hardest job that I ever had to do. To be an official escort, yes, you're going to do everything impossible for the family, for that military branch, and no matter which branch, they all assign somebody as being an official escort. And once Norman's body got here, things started happening. I walked down the aisle of the church with his mother. Norman and I danced, we went to dances together, we played together, we were young Marines together. He ate at my house, I ate at his house. I mean, you've got an emotional attachment to the family. 99% of your official escorts do not have an emotional attachment to the family so they can do their job. Yeah, yes, they have feelings for the family, but they're not emotionally tied to the family.
Yeah.
Even today, like I said, Norman was killed in '66. Here it is, 2009. I still have feelings for him and his family. That doesn't change. Where an official escort for someone else, they'll go in, do the job they're supposed to do, and boom, they go on to the next. So that becomes a part of history. It will always live with me. And that's what I mean. It was the hardest job that I could ever have. And when we buried him, I couldn't cry. I couldn't express my emotions because I was the official escort for the Marine Corps. And I'm standing tall and straight and proud as a Marine. But after we were leaving the cemetery, and I got into the limousine with his mother, and she says, Marines do cry, don't they? And the tears just started flowing. Now I can let go. But nobody else could see that, because I'm supposed to be representing that branch of the service, which makes it very, it makes it very tough on the individual. I don't know if they would do that again today as what they did back then, because I came home and said, oh, you're going to be the official escort. I said, well, I'm a PFC, I'm a private. I don't know what an official escort does. I was the lowest ranked one there, and I come to find out, anything the family wanted, everybody was jumping to do it. But I had only been in the Marine Corps for a year. So now, it's a hard situation to put an 18-year-old into. Actually, I think it was still 18. It just turned 19. But these are things you have to learn to deal with. And it also makes you appreciate life a little bit more, because here's an individual that 2 years before, we were out at dances together. Old people die. Kids don't die. Kids live forever. If you stop back and think about what you did when you were a child, you swung off the branches on trees, you jumped off walls, you jumped off cliffs. Your parents got gray hair watching the crazy stuff that you're doing, because you live forever. You don't get hurt. Yeah, every now and then somebody will break up on, oh yeah, he'll mend, he'll be all right. They don't die. So you learn to appreciate every day that you have while you have it, because nobody can promise you tomorrow. And being a part of a flight crew, you understand that. I mean, the hardest job was picking up the wounded, flying medevac. I flew into a zone, and I was supposed to pick up 3 guys. So I give the guy 3 body bags, and he takes one, and he goes over to a hole, and he takes his bayonet out, and he stabs something 3 times, zips up the bag, and hands it to me. I said, hey, I'm supposed to be picking up 3 bodies. He said, you have them. And I looked at him, he said, a mortar round landed in their foxhole the night before. And that's all that's left of them. And here I am, I'm holding 3 grown men in one hand. That's a reality check. So these are things that I carry in my mind, and every combat veteran carries similar incidents in their mind. I had one Vietnamese guy who was shot. The bullet came up through here and came out over here. And he was in the back part of the chopper. And I had all Vietnamese wounded on board, and he's laying back on the ramp. And all of a sudden he started banging with his fist. So I can't crawl over the other people to get to him and find out what his problem is. So he stops banging. And I figure he died. And all of a sudden he started banging again. Well, I guess he's still alive. Well, we had flown into the Horseshoe, which was outside of the Citadel in Way. And I got out my door because I couldn't let the ramp down where I was. I came around, and there's an access panel here on the back. And I let the ramp down, and here he is. He's laying there. He's got a crease in his face going like this. And what was happening, his head would roll this way, and his face would actually open up. But it wasn't bleeding. It looked more like Jell-O. It wasn't bleeding. But when he rolled his head this way, he couldn't breathe. His face opened up, but it blocked all the air passages. And when his head rolled back the other way, it all came back together again. I started laughing. He lived.
Wow.
He survived.
Huh.
He survived. Now, I don't know whether he's still alive today or not, but the corpsman that had taken him off my job, I asked him about the guy. He said, oh yeah, he survived. He was going to be fine.
Wow.
Because the way the bullet went through, didn't hit any vital organs.
Mm-hmm.
If it had gone up this way, it would have come out through the brain. But the way it came through here and out, the only thing you have in there is tissue. And when he rolled this way, he couldn't breathe. That's when he was pounding, and his head would just roll the other way, and it would all come back together again. But see, sometimes you see too much, or you do too much, and under the situation, the only thing that could have been done for him, he could wrap his face with gauze, so that it would stay together until he got there. But he was on a board. They brought him in and set him on. He was the last one in, laying on the ramp. It's a crazy little thing. I'll give you one more. We had gone out and we were picking up a recon team, and we couldn't land. And basically, what happened is the helicopter backed up to the mountain. So the wheels are not, they're hovering. They dropped the ramp, and I put the gunner's belt on, and I reached out, and I pulled the guys in, manually pull them on the aircraft. And the pilot yells, Sam, get up here. So I closed the ramp. Now we're still hanging off the side of the mountain. I go up to the pilot, and he points at the engine gauges, and I got one engine gauge running at 60%, and the other ones are running at 110%. And this doesn't make any sense. He says, I don't think I have enough power to take off with we've got our 4-man crew plus the 5-man recon team we just picked up. He said he didn't think he had enough power to take off. So I went back and I ran back all the way down the aircraft, checked the engines, everything looked fine. I ran all the way back to the front, and I got in between the pilots. I said, everything looks fine, you should have enough power. He said, I don't know. I said, I'll tell you what you do. You dive down the side of the mountain. By the time we hit the Florida Valley, we should have enough airspeed to pull up. And it just shocked me. The pilot looked at me, gave me a silly grin, and took the helicopter, zoom, down the side of the mountain. We were about maybe 50 feet above the trees. And we're flying down the side of the mountain. And what happened was, and this was my reasoning, we had relieved the pressure off the engines. And it gave them time to reset. So the one that was doing 60% went back to 100%. The one that 110% went back to 100%. And we had enough power and we pulled up. And I looked at the pilot and I said, "You listen to me?" He says, "Well, it sounded right to me." I said, "I don't know anything about flying them. I only fix them." You know? I said, if I was wrong, we would have made a big dent in Vietnam. We would have never got the power back, and we would have made one big hole in Vietnam, crashing and burning.
Jeez.
And the pilot said, "You were right." "What do you mean I was right? I'm a corporal, you're a captain."
Wow.
But that's the faith that the pilots had in the crew chief. That the knowledge he has of that aircraft, along with his knowledge, will keep the thing in here. And the Lieutenant Colonel Dave Calden that I was talking about earlier, I hooked up with him on the internet. I found him. He was living in Virginia Beach. And I said, "I'm looking for a captain." Calden flew at HMM 164 back in '67. He comes back and says, "My God, Sam Beamon, is it really you?" He said, "You knew more about that aircraft than anybody else." And that's what my job was. Now, he was born in Cheshire, Connecticut, and he was living in Maine at that time. And then after he got out of the Marine Corps, he went down. He had family that was in Stafford Springs and also Avon, Connecticut, but he was living in Virginia Beach. And he was coming up for Thanksgiving. And I told him, I wanted to see him. He says, "I can't stop on the way up, but I'll stop on the way back down." And me, him, and his wife sat in the Marriott for almost 3 hours, just talking and reminiscing about things. And he had put me back on flight pay, and he was a captain. And I to my dying day, I will believe that they sent him to Quezon to be a forward air controller, because he put me back on flight pay, because somebody in the squadron didn't like me. And his time up there, he received a Silver Star, which is the third highest award in the country. You got the Congressional Medal of Honor, you got the Navy Cross, then you got the Silver Star. So what he did was spectacular up there, because the Marine Corps just doesn't hand that out. And a year and a half ago, he passed away from cancer. He developed Agent Orange up there at Quezon. And he had beaten the cancer, I'm going to say it was back in the mid-1990s. And it came back on him, and he passed away in December of year before last. But like I said, there's a different kind of a relationship between officer and enlisted than what you would have under normal circumstances. Anytime you're dealing with a flight crew, there is no rank. I know you're a captain. I know you're a colonel. I know you're a lieutenant or a major or whatever. And they know what my rank. They don't say Corporal Beamon. No, they say, "Hey, Sam." I might yell, "Hey, Surfer Joe." I know what your nickname is. You don't have time, Colonel Shadrick, request permission to speak. No, I'm going to tell you what I have to tell you because it's important, and you work as a team. And I had a second lieutenant. He had just come over from the States, and he was standing in the back of the aircraft, and he was inspecting my engines, and he didn't know what in the world he was looking at. And I'm standing by the ramp when I'm watching him, and I knew he didn't know what he was doing. And he says, "What do you think of the outfit?" I says, "It sucks, sir." Oh, he went nuts. Sucks. He said, "This is still the Marine Corps." I said, "Look around you. And we're all greasy and dirty from working on the aircraft. I said, do they look like Marines?" He said, "Well, down in that maintenance office, that's still a military organization down there." I said, have you been down there? There's no organization down there whatsoever. And, you know, he just started to walk away. And he asked me the questions. I gave him a clear and honest answer. But I grabbed him. I said, Lieutenant, I understand you're just over from the States, but we have a different attitude here. We're a team. I said, you asked the question, I gave you an honest answer. So he left. I said, if you want to learn how to pre-flight a helicopter, I will be glad to show you, because you don't know what the hell you're doing. And he walked away. Now I'd say he went and he talked to some of the other officers about me. Now, I don't know what he said, but I think he was told, you better listen to this man. And he came back in a couple hours. He says, would you mind showing me how to pre-flight? I said, I'd be glad to show you. And I took him, and he turned out to be one of the better officers. Mm-hmm. But you know, you had to knock that shiny brass off of him, because nobody's ever talked to him that way. And at that point in time, I think I had been in Vietnam for over a year. They're like, here, what are you going to do? Send me to Vietnam? I'm already here. But, you know, that's just some of the stories that you have of individuals that you come across, and different attitudes and phobias that you have to deal with. You know, you don't worry about dying no more. You know, you really don't. You see too much of it. You know, you fly the troops out there, and you can see the nervousness, the uncertainty on the expression of their face, and you can also see the relief when you bring them back. So you're doing something positive. You know, you can't really compare it to what went on during World War II or even Korea. I mean, it's a different attitude, because everybody rode by truck. So you might take them out there by truck, but you may never see them again. Here, you're seeing these individuals on a daily basis. So especially with the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, you develop a bond with the grunts, because they're right there on ship with you. You're developing these relationships. And when they run into trouble, hey, if it's Foxtrot Company of 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, they run into trouble. Well, you know half of the guys that are in Foxtrot, or hotel company, whatever company it is, but you get to know these individuals. And like I said, you're dealing with them on a daily basis. So flying in a transport helicopter is flying like there's no other. Huey Cobra or Huey Gunship, they don't see these people. Your fast movers, as we call them, you know, your jet jockeys. At that point in time, they were flying Phantoms. Now they're flying F-15s and F-16s, F-18s. They're bombing and they're strafing. They're doing that. You don't see the individual. Your B-52 bombers, or your B-1 or B-2 bombers, they don't see the individual. The only one that sees them are your transport helicopters. And the Army has their medevac helicopters. Marine Corps don't have that luxury to have that many aircraft. So at any mission that you're flying, you could become medevac. And we used to do what was called medevac standby, of which we'd wait at the base with a corpsman. And we'd have the interior of the chopper set up with, I'm going to say 4 to 6 litters. So when they brought somebody in, they could put them right in the litter. And we'd fly them to the aid station. But it was the same helicopter. We're doing the same job. You know, in the Army, they got these nice red crosses on there. On the Marine Corps, you're going to bring them to wherever they have to go. You might bring them out to Alpha or Charlie Med, or you might fly them out to the hospital ship. You might pick some people up at Charlie Med, and someone needs more extensive medical procedures, and you take them out to the Repose or the Sanctuary. Those are the 2 hospital ships that were off the coast of Vietnam. You had some of the best doctors and nurses in the country working on these ships. You know, and so your chances of getting good medical care was outstanding especially compared to Korea and World War II. You know, you can forget World War II. Korea, that's where they started with. They started with the MASH units, and you know, depicted by the TV show, but they can only carry two. One on either side, the little Bell helicopter with the bubble on front.
Mm-hmm.
Or they had the H-19, the CH-19, which was made in Sikorsky, and you might be able to carry 3 or 4. I could carry 15.
Wow.
You know, but you know, because of weather conditions and mechanical restrictions, we never carried that many. Because what they had, this little black area up here at the front of the engines, they're actually kind of small. These are dirt barriers. Actually, they were a lot longer than that. They kept the sand and dust and dirt out of the engine, being sucked into the engine, but it also reduced your power by about 15%. So, you know, you don't have to deal with sand erosion. They're dealing with the same thing in Iraq right now. In Afghanistan, is sand erosion. It's the biggest thing, from the blades to the engines of these fast-moving parts of the aircraft, and the sand is just eating them up. So, you know, that's one of the things we had to look at. I mean, they've learned a lot from the time we were flying them in Vietnam. But sand erosion, that's a big problem for a helicopter. But like I said, we never carry, maximum capacity on this aircraft would be 20 combat equipped Marines plus a crew of 4. So you're flying 24, and we never carried more than 15 because of temperature and humidity and conditions that you're flying in. And you're flying, you sometimes hear combat power. That's max power, and you're doing maneuvers that would actually break a normal aircraft. But it's still within limits, where you come in and you land with the helicopter, and you sit there and you pick up your cargo and you lift off. And that's nice. You land when somebody starts shooting at you. You grab the collective stick, you're pulling it up here. I'm getting out of here. Now you're putting undue stress on the aircraft that you weren't even thinking about. Or you'll come in and you'll make a high-speed turn, and you'll come in and you'll slide to a stop, pick up the wounded, and off again. You're adding stress to the aircraft. It's not that nice, easy, set it down and take off.
Yeah.
And this is what, that's why the structural failure came in. Some of the accidents were pilot error. We've had pilots land and rip the landing gear off because they're coming in into a hot zone. It's not the time to try and be nice. Just bring the aircraft back. We'll put more wheels on it, But these are the things you got to deal with.
Wow.
See what happens when you get my mouth running?
Well, I appreciate you doing this.
I actually, it's the first time that I've actually sat down, and nitpicked about it. Even writing the book, I didn't take it to this level because I already know it. I already know the feelings and everything, and it's just trying to recant the incidents that took place. And half of them I forgot about, half of them. The funny ones you remember, the serious ones you remember, but the mundane ones, I mean, how many times can you say, yeah, I landed here and I picked up some cargo and I brought it over, we brought it over and dropped it off, and we went back and we picked up some water and we brought it over here, and we went back and we got some food, we got some sea ready. Here it is Thanksgiving, we're delivering turkey dinners out to the troops on the hills, and even brought them ice cream that wasn't melted,
Wow.
So, they're out there doing their job, but we're doing our job too. They're in combat, there's no such thing as a day off. You're working 24/7. Whatever you have to do to get the aircraft flyable. And the quietest time was flying, because there's a lot of maintenance that goes into the operation of a helicopter. There's parts that have to be greased, there's a part you got to check, you got to know the flight time. You're only allowed so many hours of operation for maybe the drive shaft or the engines or the transmission, and it becomes what they call high time. Now you're in a critical area. That engine needs to be changed because it could fail. So you want to get that out. Same thing with the transmission, same thing with the blades. So there was always, your chopper might be okay, but you're working on somebody else's chopper now. You're a mechanic, so you got to do that also. Like I said, nobody really knows what the job of a helicopter crew chief is until you fly with them, and then you learn real quick. But it doesn't make a difference if it's in Vietnam or if it's in Iraq. The job is the same. You're flying off the carriers, and you're flying into a hostile area. All the same. The job, the responsibility, support the troops, it's all the same. And that's what you do.
Well, I want to thank you for participating and for telling your story.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I've got a Facebook friend in Italy.
Uh-huh.
And Franco, he's great. And with Facebook, it automatically translates my English into Italian and his Italian back into English.
Really? Huh.
And he is so enthused about the Vietnam War and helicopters. And we talk back and forth constantly. He's trying to get a copy of my book, too.
Cool. Cool.
I said, I don't know if they're going to translate it into Italian or not. He said, don't worry about it. I'll get somebody to read it to you. But I got another friend, one in England, and also one in Australia. And it's the same thing. And, they want to know about the Vietnam War, the Vietnam veteran, and the attitude of Americans. Because they only know what they read, and it's a small soundbite of what's going on in this country. And I've always been pro-military, but they asked me my feelings on the war. I said, I have no feelings on the war. I do it as I'm told, plain and simple as that. So I have learned not to question. And it came down to the police department. You give an order, you do. You want to question it, you question it later. But they want something done. If you want somebody arrested or you want somebody medically evacuated, that's what the mission is. That's what the job is. You go do it. We'll talk about it later. But right now, we're going to get the job done. And you got the young kids out there doing the exact same thing that I did, and they're doing a great job. But to sit back and, I could have been flying in North Carolina and died. I mean, it could have been mechanical failure, it could have been weather, it could have been a pilot error, it could have been overloading the chopper, it could have had the center of gravity off. I could have died there. Or I could have died in Vietnam. What's the difference? You're still flying, you're still doing the job, you're still putting yourself in harm's way. There is no difference. The only difference is in Vietnam, they shot at you. But you could shoot back. You could shoot back, plain and simple as that. Here in the States, you didn't have the guns on the chopper, but you're still practicing. The pilots have to learn how to lift up a load, how to maneuver into a tight area, to learn to trust the crew chief and the gunner, because they're sitting up in front. They can't see what's going on in the back. You might have to move left, right, up, down, forward, back to set it down safely. And the crew chief is the one that gives the final okay to set it down. But nobody thinks about that. If we're carrying an external load and it starts to oscillate and it's endangering the flight, the crew chief hits the red button to pick up a load, to drop it. The pilot has that ability also, but he'll tell them pickle it, and it's gone. Awesome responsibility. And I laughed and joked with some of the pilots. I said, if the pilots didn't fly it right, we told them that too. Because if they had made a hard landing, we have to go through a number of of tests, stress tests on the aircraft because you made a hard landing. And I'll chew you out for that too. Because I'm the one that's got to do the testing. And yes, we watched what was going on in the cockpit, along with what went on in the cabin. And you know, and it's an awesome job. It really is. It really is. I look at the Huey Cobra where they got the pilot and the gunner up there, and they're both officers. I'm saying, how does it fly without a crew chief? Well, the crew chief is on the ground. He says, okay, he signs off, look at captain, you can fly. It's a different feeling when you fix it and you go with it. You know, you can be a plane captain or a crew chief or a flight engineer. You know, these are for different aircraft, but the responsibility is still the same. If you're a plane captain, let's say you're a plane captain in the Navy for an F-18, that's your airplane, and you sign off, it's good. And the captain, your plane is ready, and he stands there and he give you a salute back. If you don't come back with it, I'll give you another airplane, because you're still on the ship. The captain leaves with the airplane. Transport helicopter, the crew chief is with the aircraft. Now, you better make sure things are right, because if he doesn't come back with the aircraft, it's your job to bring that aircraft back, one way or the other. Either you fly it back or you strip it down and blow it up. Plain and simple as that. But your job is to get back home in one piece. That's the ultimate job. I hope you learned something.
Indeed, I did.
Am I your first one?
Well, actually, you're the second one.
Oh.
I interviewed a gentleman a couple weeks ago,
Uh,
World War II in Korea,
uh,
and so, but again, I want to thank you for participating,
okay.
and let me just see where we're at in terms of, perfect.